Please join me in welcoming for his senior speech someone who really needs no introduction to this community, Rishi Bedi.
Raise your hand if you've ever heard the expression, curiosity killed the cat.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Why do we say that? Where did that phrase come from, and how has it weaseled its way into our modern parlance? Well, I was curious, so I looked it up on Wikipedia, the source of all knowledge. It turns out that the original proverb has absolutely nothing to do with curiosity. The original phrase, coined in Ben Jonson's 1598 play, Every Man in His Humor, said, quote, "Helter skelter, hang sorrow, care will kill a cat," end quote. There's nothing in there about curiosity. And then somewhere along the way, it got perverted 304 years later to curiosity killed the cat on Bechtel's Handbook of Proverbs. Asking questions has always been an important part of my life. Curiosity for the sake of pleasure, a hedonistic sort of quest for the next interesting thing. Fueled by the short attention spans propagated by a television and the internet, the curiosity of a 21st century teenager is certainly hard to satiate. Wikipedia is really a drug. It's addictive. It induces a trance that's quite difficult to break. There's just so much information out there, and it's intoxicating to have it all at your fingertips all of the time. But let's step away from the internet for a minute and back a few years. I remember extremely clearly one particular day during my 4th grade year here at Gilman. I'd been absent the previous day and was returning, having missed one of Mrs. Eichelhardt's math classes. Those of you that remember Mrs. Eichelhardt will surely remember her dog, Kobe. But this story has nothing to do with him. He's just really cute. I had to stay in for recess one day, which I was excited about because it meant I would get some one-on-one time with Kobe while Mrs. Eichelhardt briefed me on the things I'd missed. That day it had been multiplying integers. Mrs. Eichelhardt explained to me why a positive times a positive remains a positive, and then proceeded to begin to explain why a positive times a negative is a negative. But I cut her off as she was explaining that, and asked what happens when you multiply a negative by a negative. I don't know how exactly to describe to you why I wanted to know so badly that instant, or why I was so excited to find out a moment later that a negative times a negative is in fact a positive. But I was. That was a really great day. I realized that everyone might not share my 4th grade enthusiasm for multiplying integers, but I'm sure you can all think back to a time when you learned something of no particular immediate relevance that you just thought was mind-blowingly cool, not because of its pertinence to your life, but because you just really internally, viscerally, really liked the idea. So why do we bother to learn things like that? Why do we bother how to learn how to multiply negative numbers together? Or take the time to read the newspaper to learn about faraway events in lands we may never visit? Why do we read about the histories of ancestors long ago dead, with lives nearly impossible to relate to? Of course, in the ideal universe, man would know exactly what he needs to seek out for survival, and would pursue that end without question or distraction. Alas, that is not the world we live in, and I'd say that's for the better. There's a clear evolutionary imperative for serendipitous curiosity. It is impossible to know what is necessary or what is needed to perpetuate our species. So we've learned to explore. We get lost. We try things that may or may not work because we have to, because stagnation is not an option for survival. Because if we stagnate, the person next to us will not stagnate and they'll beat us. It was true for our ape ancestors in a very literal sense, and it remains figuratively true for man today. To live, we cannot stay static, and curiosity is the engine that makes us move. We're particularly lucky, in fact, as human beings. Have you ever wondered why adult humans aren't as hairy as other adult mammals? If you have, the phenomenon is called neoteny by developmental biologists. The characteristic of continuing to exhibit childhood qualities well into adult maturity. like a lack of body hair. Neoteny also happens to be the reason why we're able to remain curious as adults. We retain a fundamental childlike wonder about the world that no other species has, and the ability and desire to explore that wonder without a direction or purpose. Sometimes, though, exploring our curiosity serves a more urgent need. There have been times where I have conspicuously neglected to ask, in retrospect, seemingly obvious questions. One particular instance stands out from the 4th of July 2010. It involves fireworks, generally not devices that require particular technical aptitude, especially for somebody who wants to be an engineer. Well, one particular brand of omen candle I had in my hand gave me a bit of trouble. It was conveniently marked with an arrow pointing towards one end. I wondered as I walked out across the asphalt with it, with the candle in one hand and my lighter in the other, whether that arrow was meant to point up into the air towards the fireworks' eventual trajectory, or whether it was supposed to come down towards the ground, the direction in which you placed the firework. Both options, to me, seemed totally viable. I could not distinguish whether or not the arrow should point up or point down. Now, I should have asked. I should probably have turned around and asked somebody who knew what they were doing which way the arrow points. But I didn't. I pointed it downwards. And as some of you out there who are more astute in the art of pyrotechnics than I may have gathered at this point, the Roman candle fired downwards into the ground, made a fairly loud, terrifying noise before making its own little crater in the grass. So lesson learned. Ask the question. But easier said than done. Sure, it might be easy to look something up on Wikipedia, to ask an anonymous question of the internet. But that's not really how questions are in real life. Asking a question is not just an impersonal request for information. It's also an implicit admission that you don't know something, that you don't understand something, that you're in the dark. It's a stark underlining of the fact that you are missing something that you need, to yourself and those around you. It makes you vulnerable, and that's scary. I used to teach my grandmother how to use the computer when I was little. She'd come over from India, she didn't have a computer there, so she'd come to our house in Baltimore, and during the few months she'd spend here every year, I would teach her things like how to use Word, how to go on the internet, whatever. I was not the most patient teacher as a young child. I would get frustrated when she would not understand something that to me seemed really obvious. Of course, it wasn't obvious to her because she'd never used a computer before. I didn't get that. She'd ask me the same thing over and over during the same sitting. And I would get frustrated. I would get visibly frustrated. Until one day, she stopped asking questions and then eventually stopped asking me for lessons. It wasn't until years later, when I was sitting in a classroom listening to a teacher berate a student for asking the same question repeatedly, that I started to see what a mistake that had been. It's critically important that we grow up in an educational environment that encourages questions. Not just questions about curricular material in the classroom, questions about the things we do and why we do them. There have been some pretty significant times in the world where some pretty important people have failed to ask some pretty important questions. Or if they were being asked, they just weren't being heard. And that never ends up well. Our history here at Gilman is far from perfect. Neither is the United States. Just look at the history of race relations in either. But what makes both of these institutions unique and ultimately positive forces in the world is their willingness, imperfect as they may be, to allow their constituents to ask tough questions and seek out real answers. There's a physicist who I'd like to quote. His name is Isidore Isaac Rabi. He was the 1944 Nobel laureate in physics for discovering nuclear magnetic resonance. The quote is as follows. My mother made me a scientist without ever intending to. Every other Jewish mother in Brooklyn would ask her child after school, so, did you learn anything today? But not my mother. Izzy, she would say. His name was Isidore. Izzy, she would say, did you ask a good question today? That difference, asking good questions, made me become a scientist. End quote. What I really love about this anecdote has nothing to do with science. It has nothing to do with math, it has nothing to do with physics, because really he's not talking about any of those things, and neither was his mother. In the spirit of Isidore Isaac Rabi's mother, everyone is a scientist. Every human endeavor is rooted in the spirit of questioning. Can we fly further? Can we fly higher? Can we dig deeper? Can we understand the human mind? Can we ask questions about our own identity? Can we understand why we ask questions to begin with? Can we understand love? Can we understand emotion? Can we understand why we're here? All of human advancement is predicated upon people asking questions to solve problems. They're all based on acquiring a knowledge base, using that knowledge base to pose questions, and then using those questions to challenge, uproot, and advance the knowledge base. It is part of our human nature to survive and adapt. And your ability to adapt is synonymous with your ability to question yourself and challenge dogma. Harper Lee quoted Charles Lamb in the epigraph of To Kill a Mockingbird. There's nothing to do with questions, but it's pertinent here. Quote, "Lawyers, I suppose, were children once," she writes. It's true, but it's also true that all of us, whether lawyers or otherwise, there is a neoteny inside of us that makes us lucky enough to retain the childlike curiosity about the world that makes us human. So, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Smythe, Ms. Turner, faculty, friends, mom and pop, curiosity did not kill the cat. In the spirit of this speech, I'd like to open up the floor for questions. Ask me anything, whether related to this speech or not, and I'll do my best to answer it. Yeah, Doc.
All right, so Rishi, you talked about this evolutionary necessity of curiosity because it keeps us from stagnating, it keeps propelling us forward. But you also talked about something that's beautiful about modern industrialized man, that we can be curious for the sake of being curious. I really like that, and I'd like you to elaborate.
Sure. I think one of the cool things about the world is, first of all, my favorite word in the world is serendipity. I think it's a fantastic word. I think it means an awesome thing, and I think it sounds awesome. I think it's a great word. And I think it's pertinent to Will's question. It means when you're doing something for no particular reason, when you're not engaged in any particular task for any particular theological endpoint, but at the same time something good happens, something productive happens at the end of your seemingly random action. I think part of the beauty of arbitrary curiosity in the world is that it's more productive than we let on. The number of scientific discoveries that are the product of random action rather than a clear, dedicated thought process all the way through, I think is large. So I think one of the particular beauties of the curiosity for the sake of being curious is that it leads to productive advancement. I think they're absolutely interconnected. Zip.
If you could look back in your Gilman career, sorry, I said is there anything that you wish you could have asked more about, or asked more about, learned, been more curious about?
Okay. I feel like we all are pretty okay with asking questions of our teachers, like about the curricular stuff. But I don't know, until freshman year, or maybe 8th grade, I never got to know teachers, and even to an extent some of my fellow classmates as people outside of the classroom, the field, or whatever. So I had a cool experience a couple weeks ago where we had my preschool teacher over for tea. And it was really cool because I realized that she was a really awesome person who lived in Israel on a kibbutz for a while. She'd backpacked throughout Europe. She'd done really cool stuff that I wouldn't have known about because I was a preschooler and I guess it wouldn't have been expected of me, but I never thought to ask about her life. And in the years since, I don't think I did that for a lot of other people I came in contact with. So if there were questions I would want to ask, I think, of people who I've met at Gilman or wherever, it wouldn't be curricular stuff. I'd want to know more about who people are beyond the things that they're here and paid to teach us to. Kyle.
I hate to miss this opportunity and have regrets about this speech. So in case you might know the answer, what do you think the meaning of life is?
I'm going to pop out of that question and pull one of my favorite quotes ever from Douglas Adams' book, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you haven't read it, please go home, read it. It's wonderful. You will laugh. It's fantastic. The answer his book says is 42. But he has a really cool philosophical message embedded within that. The answer is 42, but what he also tells you is that he's not telling you the question. The ultimate answer to life, the universe, and everything might be 42, but he fails to provide the question. And in his sci-fi universe or whatever he's constructed, it's really weird. It's cool though, you should read it. In his sci-fi universe or whatever, the Earth is a creation by some really smart alien species to find the question. And we were really close to finding it before some other evil aliens came and like destroyed us. But anyway, the answer is 42. We don't know the question. Earth was supposed to figure it out, and then Earth got blown. Yeah, later.
Is there one question that you would like to answer over the course of your life?
I mean, I guess I'd love to know what I'm here to do. I mean, I think that's something that all of us kind of share. It's kind of lame. If you told me that earlier, I would have come up with something clever. But yeah, Mr. Spriggs.
Rishi, what is your favorite color?
I used to say black, but then I learned that wasn't a color, and that really bugged me, even though I know that people still say it, so blue. Yeah.
If curiosity didn't kill the cat, then what or who did? Rishi, what do you think is the most important question to ask, or the most important kinds of questions to ask?
I mean, I think the most important kinds of questions to ask are those that question things that everybody does not question on a regular basis. I think there's so many things in this world that we should do. When I was brainstorming with Dr. Kraft about the speech yesterday, yesterday, Jesus. That one's still done. We were talking about like questions that people don't like normally ask. One of the things he said was like, do all of us wearing ties have the intended effect of all of us wearing ties? Like, is that serving the desired end? That's not in particular the question I think people should be asking. But I think questions of that nature, where you question things that everybody does without question on a day-to-day basis. So I think those are some of the things that can have these biggest repercussions. They can slide by without anybody kind of noticing they're snowballing effects. Yeah, Pete. Ulaanbaatar.
If you could ask one question to the higher being that is, if there is one, what would you ask and why?
Well, I would be pretty happy if I was even asking the question, because if I was asking the question, that would mean that they're there, because there would be something replying to me. So like I would be pretty down with just like hearing words that I know were coming from there. That would satisfy a lot of my own spiritual qualms. I guess I would ask if he's there, for lack of anything better. If he says yes, I guess if he says no, that would really screw with my head. Hey, God. Yeah.
We talked about the fact that the educational institution needs to like encourage people to question more, and you having been one of the more involved people in Gilman that I know, like what do you think we could do better, if anything, to encourage questions?
Sure. I think we have the resources at Gilman. I think we have the people willing to listen. In my experience at Gilman, I've always found somebody who's willing to listen, whether it's somebody who's in an administrative position of power, or whether it's just a teacher who wants to lend an ear. I think the biggest thing that we can do as the student body is take advantage of those things. Write a letter to the editor of the paper. Put something up on the bulletin board. Like, there are things there that are designed for us to speak out. People are afraid of taking advantage of them. So I'm going to answer your question and put in a shameless plug for the news, which you should all write letters to the editor to. Because that's a good thing to do, and people will read them, and you can put it on your college app. That's not the reason to do it. The reason to do it is that it is a valuable experience. People will be reading it. People will be listening to what you have to say. And the ideal world, the ideal newspaper, the ideal bulletin board, the ideal community will be one where people are talking back and forth, rather than the same group with 10 or 12 people circulating amongst themselves. Yeah, in the middle. Thanks.
If you eat yourself, do you double in size this year?
I mean, I can understand eating like, I guess if you're eating you would stay the same size. Why would you change size? Mr. Rao.
Can you sing the Act 2 finale from Damn Yankees?
Oh my God, I'm going to sing. I don't get to sing in the show, so I'm going to sing. No, I can't do this. Wait, should I? I don't know.
Yes, you should.
No, don't do it. You gotta have heart. Yeah, never doing that again. Miss Turner, how much time do I have?
How about 2 more minutes?
Okay. Yeah, in the back. Joe. So you got it.
Yeah, when you think about the power of language to like extreme type of questions, you have like, is it possible that questions exist in themselves? So mind's ability to create questions based on words and models.
That's cool. I had this argument with Adam Delheim yesterday. Or, I mean, it was kind of like tangentially related, but he asked if there's anything as a stupid question. And I was trying to cop out, saying that things can't be stupid questions because you can't string words together and call them stupid. You can call the act of somebody asking a specific string of words and a specific question to a specific person at a specific time in a specific place stupid. But the words themselves put together in the string of a question can't be stupid. And that's kind of related, because I think questions do exist in and of themselves, and that's why I was able to respond to Sam that way. I think questions do exist. If there are questions we can't verbalize, I'm always really curious to think of like how babies ask questions. And if like I could like do like some like crazy magic stuff, I would want to like be a baby, but then come back to my regular self and think about what I thought about as a baby and how I formulated those thoughts. I don't know how you would formulate something you can't put words to, but I presume it's possible since babies do it and they don't get born with language. Yeah, right in the middle.
You had to ask a question to the student body,
Like the collective student bodies, and you all respond at once, or like one at a time? No, but like would everybody respond like at once, like in unison?
Yeah.
Yes? Jesus Christ. Okay. Yeah, I think it has to be a yes or no question, because otherwise like I wouldn't be able to hear anything that you guys are saying. Let's see. I'd ask, no, it's so cliche. I'd ask, the first yes or no question that came to mind that I think is meaningful and worth asking, that I think all of you would have an opinion on, is whether or not something up there exists. That's not a particularly enlightening question. I'm not sure there are a lot of people here who are enlightened to give me a definitive response, but I guess I'd be curious to see what you guys thought. Yeah, Chris.
At what point do you think the search for knowledge becomes hubris?
I think it becomes hubris when you stop taking the time to question your questions. God, that's like weirdly like circular. But I think that as long as you keep asking questions, it can't be hubris. As long as you're questioning the things you think, as long as you're not taking answers that you're coming up with and like being like, this is it, this is the answer, this is all there is to know, I think as long as you're not doing that, you're fine. I think when people start to take science and make it into dogma or make it into things that they're refusing to question, I think you run into trouble. I think that's happened in the past. I mean, we had people who were scientifically sure the world was flat, but that turned out not to be the case. So I think when you stop asking questions about the questions you've already asked and the answer you've gotten to the questions you've already asked, that's when you start delving deeper. One more, maybe one more. 10.
Would you rather have a Frosty or a plug?
I'm afraid of alienating half of you in my response to the question, but I think I'd go with a McFlurry.